In this lecture, I wanted to cover some opening terms and positional concepts before we actually start studying the various openings. And these terms will be used throughout the lecture series on the openings, and hopefully the positional concepts will be common to all of them. And if I need to cover any more, I'll cover them as the lessons progress. But first, let's cover some basic terms. Well, the opening is just, I've already sort of stated this in the phases of the game, it's the initial moves of the game. And if you don't know, the common moves, or common sequences of moves have names. For example, the Sicilian defense and the Queen's Gambit. This way, when you talk to other chess players and you say, I played a Sicilian defense, they know what you're talking about. They know what basic moves you made and maybe even the setup. Okay. So, for example, the Sicilian defense we'll learn, I'll cover this more in detail, is just e4, then you play, the black plays c5, and this is the Sicilian defense. So, that's just a name for those two moves. Okay, and by contrast, the Queen's Gambit is just d4, d5, and then c4. So if you play those three moves, that's called the Queen's Gambit. Okay. Now, to get more specific, from these initial opening moves, like the Sicilian defense, there's other specific sequences of moves within an opening. Okay, and in the Oxford Companion, the chess list, about 1,300 named opening and lines. So, what do I mean by lines? Well, I just showed you the Sicilian defense and the Queen's Gambit. Well, within the Sicilian defense and the Queen's Gambit, you can have various lines, and see the line name comes after. So I covered the Sicilian defense and Queen's Gambit. Well, there's a line called the Dragon. There's a line called the Najorf, and then the Queen's Gambit. There's the Queen's Gambit accepted, and the Queen's Gambit Slav defense. So if we go back to our board, I already have the Queen's Gambit up here. Here's the Queen's Gambit. Okay, now if it's Black's turn to move. If Black was to capture this pawn, this would be the Queen's Gambit accepted. So this is now sort of a variation or line within the Queen's Gambit. Remember, we just back up a move. This is like one option, and it's a named option. Okay. Now let's say Black doesn't decide to play that move and instead decides to play this move. Well, this is the Queen's Gambit Slav defense. So this is another line or a variation of moves within the one named move of the Queen's Gambit, which was this. Okay, so if Black could take the pawn, or or if Black plays this, then we have sort of variations, and they're both named. Going back to the Sicilian. Okay, so this was the Sicilian. Now, my two examples were the Dragon and the Najorf. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. So how do we get this? Now, this is the Sicilian. So what about the two lines? Well, if you don't know, the most common moves or sequence of moves or next moves are so knight f3, d6, d4. C takes d4, knight takes d4, knight f6, knight c3, and then this is, so these are the most common moves to get us to the two variations that I named of the Dragon and the Najorf. And the Najorf is just this move. Okay. You may ask yourself, well, why did Black play this? But I'll cover this more in detail in the lecture of the Sicilian. That would be the Najorf, and but if Black played this, he'd be playing a variation called the Dragon. So both of these are a Sicilian defense, but if black plays this one, he's now in a line called the Najdorf. But if he plays this one, if he plays that move, then he's now in a variation or line called the dragon. Okay? Or let's move on. Okay, now I want to talk about sort of open, closed, half-open files or lines. Okay, so what is a closed file or line? Well, it's a file or line. Now let's first maybe just define it. A file is sort of the vertical column in a chessboard, and a line is sort of any line that you can draw. Or just let me show this to you. So, for example, this is the E file. Okay? And then another example is that this is like a line. Okay? So this could be like the H3, C8 diagonal, things like that. So like here's another line right here. And here's the D file. Okay, because the files are always the columns. The lines are usually named sort of with the beginning and ending. Okay, and they're usually, when you say a line, usually you're referring to a diagonal on the board. Okay, and sometimes a line could also be technically even a line like this. These are usually called ranks. So when you go across, you're on the like the 5th rank, or you could even say this line. Technically, everything is a line, and we just give names to diagonals and then horizontal lines. Okay, so let's go back to the definitions. So a closed line or file has both a white and a black pawn on it. Okay, I'm going to define these, and let's go to the chessboard and look for some of these. Now, an open file has no pawns, so you can imagine closed means both white and black have a pawn. Open means neither white or black has a pawn. And a half-open file is a file or line which just has one pawn on it. Okay, so let's go look for these on the chessboard. So let's look for a file, meaning a vertical column that has no pawns. So, well, there's only one open file on the chessboard, and it's this one. So this is an open file. Okay, has no pawns. If you go across, if you look at all the files, they have at least one pawn on them. So this is the only one that doesn't. Now, how about closed? Well, these ones both have, that means they have both white and black pawns on them. So all these files, so all these red files are closed because they both have a white and black pawn on it. And there happens to be 2 half-open files, or actually 3, sort of like what's ever left over. I'm just going to clear the thing, and remember, a file was just, of any file that only had one pawn on it. So here are the half-open files. Just to let you know, it's usually more beneficial for, if you're white, or if how can I say this, the pawn color, or the pawn is, or the side with the pawn on it is sort of at somewhat of a disadvantage. And then it may not be 100% true, but if you think about it, it's sort of like, remember, the pawns are sort of like your wall. So you have your wall in front of you, and you can sort of attack your other person's wall. So here, white could, sort of attack this wall, put its pieces down here and attack it, or black's going to be doing the same thing. So it's not always a disadvantage, but it's one of the things to an avenue for attack. But that's just a definition, or those are the definitions. It looks like I'm almost out of time, so I'm actually going to continue this lecture